up this weekend, flyweight up-and-comers looking to pick up the lower rung ranked fighters in the flyweight division. We have Pete Spratt's protege, CJ Vergara, taking on Japan's Tatsuro Taira. Matt, how do you think my flow was at the start of that one?
That's pretty good.
You think it was pretty good? Like, do you think I could be the next, like, $165 out of the Maritimes?
I do not.
You don't think so? Like, old days gold and covering the bases, back when we used to punch each other in the faces. Do you ever listen to $165?
My ears hurt right now.
Like, he's from Uniacke, Nova Scotia. Either way, we will let the fans hear about this flyweight matchup between one of Japan's hottest prospects in Tatsuro Taira. You look at it, you have a couple of other fighters that are kind of making moves. I mean, overall, there's not a lot of Japanese fighters in the UFC, so it is big to see a guy like Tatsuro, who was the former Shuto champion at flyweight, make the move into the UFC, have a very dominant win in his UFC debut against Carlos Candelario, looking to move forward against kind of a similar opponent to Candelario in CJ Vergara, and you kind of look at it. For Candelario, you're going to be defending takedowns, trying to get off a bottom because Candelario has a lot of ground and pound abilities. To Vergara, who has had to rally in both of his UFC fights, loses to Ode Osborne, but has nearly a 10-8 third round in that matchup. And against Clayton Rodriguez, well, I thought Rodriguez won that fight, but the judges didn't. Vergara ends up getting the split. It's his first UFC victory. I really do like CJ Vergara's style, and I do think it's one that'll last in the UFC. I think he's decently well-rounded, but it's the fact that he's had to rally in a couple of these fights that gives me a little bit of pause against this young up-and-comer out of Japan in Taira.
Well, Tatsuro was so hot before he came into the UFC. Like, people were really excited about his UFC debut. I know I was for sure, and if you do go back and watch a lot of the tapes today, you notice that he does have a really unorthodox skill set. He likes high body trips. Like, he's a really good grappler, he's a really good wrestler. You look at him and you understand how physically strong he must be when he is in that cage, but he just has a really unique style of his wrestling. It was just, okay, how is the striking going to translate over to the UFC? Because up until he did show up, it wasn't a lot of single strikes. It wasn't a lot of putting combinations together. But he looked like he upgraded it before he came over, I gotta be honest, and that made me reassess where I do think his whole ceiling is, because I think there is a world where Tatsuro does go on a really big win streak to start his UFC career. I'm not gonna say it goes on like a Hamza, where it's okay, you're entitled to discussion 5 fights in, but I really do think Tatsuro could have one of those careers where he's firmly entrenched in that top 15 for a long time to come.
You might not believe us, you can find those Shuto fights very readily on YouTube, but if you watch Taira there, it's single shot reset, body lock takedown with a trip, like, he does have unorthodox takedowns, and that is the biggest part of his game. It's getting the fight down to the mat and threatening with submissions. He's great in the scrambles. And then if you compare just the fights that he had over in Japan to his UFC debut, he almost looked like a much leveled up fighter. And if you compare it, I mean, look, Vergara already in his prime, he's 31 years old. Tatsuro is only 22. And if you consider it even just statistically against Candelario, 43-0 were the strikes in the third round of that
Pretty
one.
impressive.
Candelario gets an early takedown. Tatsuro ends up on top for the majority of the round, and by the end of it, the elbows are just vicious. He drops him with a right cross in the second round of the fight, and in the first round, 15-10. It was relatively close. It was a feeling out process. And again, I can't stress this enough. Like, you look at it, Kanako Murata is another big prospect, but she broke her arm in her last fight, so she's been out for a while. We had Kinoshita on Dana White's Contender Series. He's kind of the future of Japan. Taira's already there and making those moves. And for Vergara, I mean, it really is tough. I mean, he picks up the win over Bruno Correa over on Dana White's Contender Series, finishes him, and that's a UFC veteran. You don't often see Pete Spratt, the guy who beat Robbie Lawler, in the corner of many UFC fighters. So you know that that's a little bit special, and the broadcast is going to play off of that. But again, there's 18 unranked UFC flyweights right now in the UFC fan rankings. These are 2 of them with a big shot to move up. Maybe a fight like a Tagir Ulanbekov next. I don't think that's too far of a stretch for both of these guys. But again, for Taira, it is those unorthodox takedowns. I just wonder, will he struggle with the takedown defense against a guy like Vergara, who will tend to chain a lot of them together?
I don't think he will, and I do think the fact that Vergara does chain them is really important, because Taira is really good at, okay, I might not get the takedown, you might take me down, but that's not really when the grappling begins. Like, the grappling begins once we're on the ground. And for Tatsuro, he does excel in that reverse grappling. He is good at getting back on top of his opponents, even after it looks like they've been able to complete a takedown attempt on him. It's just, he does have a really unique skill set that we don't often see in the UFC. You don't normally see guys who, now yes, his striking has improved quite a bit, but still, guys who do a lot of those high body trip takedowns, guys who are willing to give up the takedown, even though I would still classify them mostly as a grappler. Just a really unique skill set, and that's why I do like this matchup. He's fighting a guy who, like you had mentioned, it's a very similar matchup to his UFC debut. It's just Vergara's a little bit more leveled up in most areas, and that's why it should test Tatsuro quite a bit more.
For Vergara, he was a plus 170 underdog against Ode Osborne. He was a plus 270 against Rodriguez his last time out. He won that fight by split decision. I'll take it to my grave that I thought Rodriguez won it, but regardless, we have a look at the odds in this matchup, and Vergara coming in at a plus 230. He's now a plus 193. For Taira, open to minus 270, minus 240. We have a look at the Tapology votes. Surprise to us as they are to you. Taira is one of those prospects. He is undefeated, as we all know. He was an amateur champion in Japan as well, so the O's are still there. Matt, I'm going to say over under 90% Taira.
I was thinking like 82. I'll say above 90, though.
You're going to say above 90? It is exactly 90. 1,382 total votes, 90% Taira, 43% by decision, 46% by submission. For the 10% that have Vergara, 60% by decision, 21% by knockout. I think Taira gets the win, and the reason why I like him in a matchup like this, for Rodriguez, he kind of gets stuck once he got taken down, and he couldn't really get out of the precarious positions against Vergara. Rodriguez is a very, very wonky striker, and that's where he had a lot of his success in that fight. Ode Osborne is good with his defensive submissions, but once he gets taken down, he can get held down as well. For me, with Taira, I've seen him taken down on the regional scene, but I've seen him scramble out of position. I've seen him snatch up an arm to then kind of slink his way over to the back. He really is a tricky grappler. I think his time spent in the States getting ready for his last fight obviously accentuated his striking, but back over in Japan, he can really focus up with his original team, get ready for some of those kind of scrambles on the mat. So for me, I do like Japan's Taira in this one. I like the level up that I've seen in the striking. Vergara, always a sneaky underdog, but I do like Taira here.
And I think Tatsuro could get better. That's the thing. Like, if we saw that big of an improvement between his second to last and last fight, I'm not counting out another step up that he could have taken in between the time off between his last fight and this one. I think Tatsuro is going to be one of those prospects we're going to talk about for a long time. I would like to see him, though, if he does get the win over Vergara, give him one of those Victor Henry, Raphael Assuncao fights. Give him a guy in the flyweight division who's been around.
Tim Elliott.
Give him a Tim Elliott. I think that's a good call. Mateus Nicolau might be a little bit too high in the division, but you get the idea. Just someone who's been around for a long time, since before they kind of got rid of the division and brought it back. Like, if Dustin Ortiz was still around, that would have been the perfect opponent.
A great fight. Bring back Dustin Ortiz. Bring back the Monkey God. Just do a one championship trade. I'd love to see that. Both of us going with Japan's Taira to get the win. We have a big time card, including 2022 UFC Hall of Famer Cub Swanson taking on Jonathan Martinez in the co-main event. You're not going to want to miss that one. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.